your Chargers linebacker, Dan Henley, and you're tuning in with Chargers Unleashed.
Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning in to the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, I'm going to need you to calm down because it's May and we're talking Chargers football, but who the hell cares? Chargers officially kick off their OTAs at the beginning of this week. Rookies and veterans alike, all basically in attendance. I think the Chargers were virtually at 100% attendance, which was great to hear. But we got a lot of stuff to go through because we heard from the likes of Navarro Bowman, from Denzel Perryman, a lot of key observations from the first few days of OTAs that are pretty enlightening as it relates to what the new regime is already installing in the early days of May. But Dan Wolkenstein, before we kick it off, sir, are reeling from a little bit of a hangover, not the kind that you think, from a Disneyland hangover, because literally Dan has spent the last day and a half in the happiest place on earth.
Yes. I didn't know that Disney hangovers existed until you do a day and a half with a toddler. And you start off, hit the ground running. You're doing every single thing. We did the lightning round or lightning pass, whatever thing. Otherwise, I'm doing great, and it's exciting to see this Chargers team kind of getting into action and doing things differently. We've heard rumors and mumblings. We've seen kind of glimpses of it. But now we're starting to get some key observations and some live footage of some of this stuff in full swing. So lots of exciting things to discuss. We obviously know this is a live show. We love live shows. We love the Bolt fam and folks who tune in. You know the drill, fellas and ladies. If you have a question, topic, discussion you'd like us to partake in, please put it in the comments. We'll do our best to kind of put those in and weave through as we discuss kind of the key pillars of our conversation. But yeah, Jake, nursing the Disney hangover on my side. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. I'm refreshed. I'm relaxed. I'm ready for a nice Memorial weekend. I actually went to Disneyland with my wife last Friday.
Happy birthday to the better half, by the way.
Thank you, definitely is. And apparently grad night has changed since you and I were back in the days of high school because, look, I'll just say this. High school kids got it good when it comes to grad night events because when Dan and I were in high school, it was like you came to Disneyland at night at 8 o'clock and you were virtually there, overnight until 8 a.m. the next morning. Apparently there's a whole weekend that's dedicated to this and everybody gets like the entire day. So wish I could have had that, but it was also nice to kind of have that intimate where it's just shut down just for you type of effect. So I understand the Disneyland hangovers just as much as you do, Dan. And when we were there last Friday, it was absolutely packed. Didn't get to do that much. we were right there in Rise of Resistance, maybe like 10 minutes before, you get into the opening of the ride. And then, sorry, folks, the ride has completely shut down. We do not know when we will be reopening. So we had
Okay. I know this is a Chargers podcast, but side tangent, just for a hot sec. Jake, I didn't tell you about this. Folks in the chat, if you're in LA, let us know your favorite ride at Disneyland while I go through this quick story. On the Disneyland, I'm at Disneyland. I'm on the Indiana Jones ride. 15 seconds after you go through door number 2, turn the corner, lights go on, gates go up. We're experiencing technical difficulties. And the ride shuts down. And I got to do a backstage tour. I get to get up. The lights are all on anywhere. I walk back on the track, back to the front. I was like, this is fun. This is actually probably more entertaining than the actual ride. So I understand fully when rides break down and you're sitting there and you're like, of course, this is me.
Yes.
This is my life.
Yes.
But Jake, before we go further, this is a Chargers podcast. Let's pay the bills for the Chargers podcast. Talk about our friends.
Want to remind everybody that BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season. Everything from baseball, golf, NBA, and the NHL playoffs. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow for all your favorite teams. Get into the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds for just about every sport that is out there. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag, or use your mobile device to get into the action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Jake Cochran says, morning, boys. Just started my posty route down here in Australia. Perfect timing to listen while I'm on the bike.
Like maybe that.
What is posty? Do you know what that is? I'm in the
I don't
US.
actually know what it is, but
Yes.
maybe I'm trying to link it. Maybe it's the postal route. So, which is totally fine. I could be completely wrong. That's just me possibly being an idiot and just maybe just using some low hanging fruit.
That makes two of us.
Yes.
Matthew Dahl says, I love the interview with Chris Harry. Thank you. Appreciate you tuning into that. If you have not done so already, Chris Harry joined us last week and had an awesome discussion.
Talk about great nuggets of information to provide.
Highly recommend tuning that in. So, Jake, OTAs are upon us. We saw a first-round pick moved around the offensive line. We're seeing Lad McConkey already making an impact. We're seeing the secondary making moves. Where do you want to start? We also heard people at the press conference, like you mentioned. We got lots to hear. Biggest takeaway from the last few days for you is what?
I think we'll go ahead and we'll finish with just the general observations of what we saw. But here's probably the biggest thing you take away, because immediately you say, okay, what's the effect of Jim Harbaugh immediately at practice? And from everything that we heard, there was no tunes blaring in the speakers on the field as opposed to previous seasons. The atmosphere there just seems to be, one direction. Everybody's mindset's there, and Dan,
not the band One Direction.
No, definitely not that. But Dan, this made me think of the exact same thing that Chris Harry was talking to us about in terms of the little details. When he was making his comment about when they were coming out for rookie practices and they were dressed in full game gear and everything was, tucked in, and just little things like that may seem trivial to the everyday eye. But these are the little details that he is installing in camp thus far, that he's basically making a statement with silence that things are changing. And then, Dan, of course, we'll get into this a little bit more, but when I heard that after nearly a 2-hour practice on Monday that that Ben Herbert was directing conditioning drills after that, I would love to know how everybody felt on Tuesday morning after that practice.
Bro, could you imagine the common folk, you and I, going through whatever 2-hour workout that they are doing and then doing that? I legitimately would be crying on all fours. Like, I don't think I can move.
It's like the movie Miracle, where they just finished playing the game, and then Kurt Russell basically has them going back and doing lines again and again and again until 3:00 in the morning. Yeah, it's just like, woo!
Brutal.
Not messing around.
Yeah, so let's kick this off, Jake. Then let's start with the at the podium stuff. We heard from Navarro Bowman. We heard from Denzel Perryman. We heard from Poona Ford as well, who clearly loves sunny California and came here for Jim Harbaugh. Let's start off with the one. Wrong button. Here we go. Let's start off with Navarro Bowman.
Yeah, Dan, I think the biggest quote for me, obviously, he went into his whole relationship with Jim Harbaugh. He had talked about how he had thought of this idea coming back a few years ago and getting an opportunity to coach for him, not knowing exactly where he was going to end up or where that was going to be. But he had talked about a hypothetical situation with Jim Harbaugh years ago about being able to come back and coach underneath him. And sure enough, obviously, for the Chargers' benefit, it ends up behooving them that they get both Jim Harbaugh, and Jim Harbaugh, staying true to his word with that discussion with Navarro Bowman, brings him to the Chargers to head up the linebacker position. And yeah, probably one of the biggest quotes that he said that resonated with me, and it was more so because it resonated with the message that we've heard from the players, from the message that Jim Harbaugh has been talking about, probably more specifically from what Jesse Minter has been talking about. This was the quote that stood out to me from Navarro Bowman. Where is it? I actually just lost it here. Pardon me. Where did it go?
Is it when he was referring to the amount of things that linebackers are able to do?
Yes, and I apologize. In basically in a summary, it was basically as a coach, you're giving them the traits that are ultimately going to end up benefiting themselves and allowing them to play at their best, which resonated with me because we've heard through the last several months about Chargers players talking about it, Jesse Minter talking about it, having the defenders play more free. Having them play more free. We've heard about Steve Clinkscale at the podium talking about stacking, doing the little things correctly that ultimately is going to get you to where you need to be. We're basically at ground zero as it stands right now for training camp. And there's so many new faces as it relates to player, coaching personnel, that there is still cohesion. Yes, you're going to try your best to hit the ground running, obviously on day one, but it's going to be far from a finished product of what you're obviously going to see. There is a lot of growing pains that this team is still going to have to go through throughout camp. And, there's going to be those moments where they're going through it throughout the season. But this just shows me again where this coaching staff's mindset is. It's putting these players in the best position that benefits them. It excels the things that they are good at. And ultimately, that's going to make them perform out there better on the field when everybody knows what everybody else is responsible for.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting when Navarro Bowman was talking about kind of the linebacking core and the role of that group, and talks about them now under Jesse Minter's defense having a lot more responsibility, a lot more freedom to do things that they simply weren't able to do when he was a linebacker back in the day. And so it's more fun to coach that. And to your point, I think it's such an advantage to have a coach that was a player, let alone a coach who was an all-pro, elite player, who is able to dissect and understand the coaching responsibilities and the scheme, and then able to not only refer to it, relate it back to the players as a coach, but then relate it back to the players as a fellow player. And so to see that in a position group that we've seen this Chargers team mightily struggle is huge. And it was fun hearing him being asked questions about Junior Colson and Deion Henley and kind of what that group is like. And his eyes kind of lit up, talk about Junior Colson. He's like, let me tell you about Junior Colson. I'm paraphrasing. We've all seen the quotes where he going on saying that Junior Colson's answering all the questions. But the part that I thought was particularly interesting was when I'm paraphrasing here, but he was saying that there were times where maybe some of the rookies, some of the players may get a little too excited. There's so many things going on with the new scheme. And Junior Colson essentially is relating and parsing down all of the coach speak, like, all right, here's all the stuff the coaches are saying, but this is really what it means to you. And so not only is he understanding the system, but he's able to teach the system in a player format. And so while he's still learning how to be a pro and go through things as a pro versus as someone who just knows the scheme, because that's one part of being a pro is understanding your job. But it's understanding how to do the entire picture, right? Clearly, he has a head start on the scheme to understand the responsibilities. But there will be a lot of responsibility on the linebacking core, and you have to be excited when Navarro Bowman's kind of leading that group.
Yeah, he talked about basically for a rookie like that to have the attention of the other 10 guys on defense, that's saying something. And as you mentioned, he still, as he had talked about, he still has basically room to grow as it relates to getting into the swing of things as far as being a pro. But you hear like the comments, and we'll talk about Denzel Perryman here in a second. Junior Colson, from the player's perspective, is not operating like a rookie.
Yeah, so he said it about both him and Deion Henley. Both of those guys are not acting like rookies or youngsters.
Yes. When it came to wearing the green dot, Navarro Bowman said, I think it's a little bit too early. And we've heard this statement before. I think it's a little too early. We haven't put the pads on. He definitely has a step forward in learning that scheme. I still think eventually when we get to the regular season that Junior Colson will end up donning the green dot, because for the exact reasons that Dan and I are, and Navarro Bowman in this case, are talking about, when you have a guy like that, and regardless whether or not it's a rookie in this type of scenario, right now, Junior Colson has the leg up, and he is with his former head coach, his former defensive coordinator. He knows exactly what the system is that they want to run, and opposed to the other 11 guys that are going to be out there on the field, regardless of the fact of it's veteran or rookie, just isolated in that linebacking group in general, he has a huge leg up. So I would still think that he's going to end up with the green dot eventually, just because of that fact.
Yeah, and the other part before we move on to Denzel Perryman, which everyone loves Denzel Perryman. That's why he's one of the most beloved players here, is because of some of the things that he says and his character and personality and just how good of a dude he is. Navarro Bowman talked about how in a lot of defenses, typically it's like Madden, right? You call a play, that's the defense you run through the snap, through the whistle. Whereas with the Jesse Minter defense that he is somewhat familiar with, there's a lot of stuff he's still learning, but players and positions have options. And so while that play may be called at first, there are then options that positions get to then call and play it the way they want to play, which in my mind is insane. As a coach to try to like have that wrangled in, like, all right, guys, we're going to call whatever, but also you can do whatever you want. Not whatever, literally, but there's a lot there. And so let's not make no mistake about it. Like, this is a lot for this team to learn. It's a new system of a fairly complex system by Jesse Minter. But to your point, they stack it. You're not having to learn everything all at once. You're getting to learn pieces as you go, and as you graduate, so to speak, move on to the next level. Then Jake, Denzel Perryman comes to the podium, and I don't know if we want to call this Ma Wizard Meatloaf, if we want to call this like doing karate in the garage, if we want to call this Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby, Shake and Bake, whatever it is.
It feels like to me it'd be maybe like a combination of Talladega Nights and maybe Blades of Glory, maybe a little bit for what Denzel is going to be referencing here in a second.
But he said he might get in trouble for this because he didn't tell Coach yet, but obviously he knows now that Coach Jim Harbaugh gives him Will Ferrell vibes. Before we get into what that even means and all the rest of the stuff, do you see Will Ferrell in Jim Harbaugh?
Look, we've had guests on this show talk about it. Dan and I have talked about it ourselves. Jim Harbaugh is who he is. And there is
unapologetically
himself. And yes, can he come off a little bit, quirky and corny with some of his one-liners, fat's the enemy of speed and, today, some of his references that he says and whatever that may be at the end of the day, he makes it work. So you could be corny as hell, but if your message is residing with that locker room as far as what the goal is, which we know how Jim Harbaugh feels about football, and the man has succeeded every single place that he has been at. Yeah, you could kind of see a little bit of Will Ferrell in that, if that's what we're talking about.
I've heard Ted Lasso. I've seen Ted Lasso.
I could see Ted Lasso in it as well. It's just it's a quirky, corny style of coaching, but the results speak for themselves, and it works. And who gives a damn if you're first, you're last? Shake and bake. Who gives a crap? At the end of the day, he's going to find a way to win. I will keep referencing Trevor Sikkema's comments on this show from what he says. Whatever it is that Jim Harbaugh wants to do, it's going to work.
Folks in the chat, you guys are loving the Anchorman stuff. Question for you, Jake. We'll get into this as we kind of go into some of our key takeaways from OTAs. Folks in the chat, from what you've seen, what has been your key takeaway so far in the offseason for this Chargers team? What has been the biggest takeaway that may be different than what you've seen in the past? Let's see. This is from Kevin. Coach's Anchorman, Ron Burgundy, brown cow, surrounded by his coaching staff, Burgundy's fellow newscasters. Caleb, Jake, says, I'm very optimistic for a successful season, honestly. I know there always needs to be some skepticism, Jake, when it comes to a new coach, but Harbaugh has proven wherever he goes, everyone is bought in. And then goes on to say, predict 12-5 in a playoff berth. Here we come, following along the likes of Sean Merriman, who predicted 12-5 as well. Leo says, I love Harbaugh analogies. They actually make sense.
They're weird, but yeah, they make sense.
Yep. Matthew Dahl comes in with an observation that he had, which we'll get to this in a second, but 11-on-11 team drills and OTAs, something we have not seen in a few years here. Denzel Perryman, I did think this was a nice nugget to hear.
we all want to, blow smoke. We're all excited about the linebacking core and about Junior Colson, his impact. Myself, obviously, am all about that. But we do need to remember and to caution ourselves a bit here that there's a lot of eggs in the basket of a rookie linebacker and a second-year linebacker who hasn't seen a lick of playing time. Denzel Perryman will play a big and pivotal role in this defense. I am very bullish on that aforementioned tandem of two linebackers. They're still very young linebackers who both have essentially played no NFL snaps that matter. So just cautioning that it might take some time for them to get to where we all think they can go. But Denzel Perryman, when he was asked, like, how much have you asked Junior Colson about the defense? And he said, to be honest, not a thing. He hasn't asked him one question about the defense. The only thing he has asked him and other Michigan players, and he alluded to it earlier, was the conditioning stuff at Michigan. That's the stuff that Denzel Perryman wanted to find answers to. So anything else on the linebacking stuff from either Perryman or Navarro Bowman before we get to our key takeaways?
Well, one fact that you kind of just brought up there, Dan, this whole fluctuation for the linebackers in general. Having a veteran presence, much like the Chargers have done, last year with Eric Kendricks. I think when you rip this linebacker core down to essentially its foundations, and you only had Deion Henley, who virtually has not played any regular season snaps, Nick Neiman, who's been regulated to mainly a special teamer, you needed a veteran presence in there to round this group out. So yes, you get a player like Junior Colson is always a very good thing. But then to hear that Navarro Bowman was actually one of the guys that pounded the table to go out and get Denzel Perryman when he found out he was available. Yes, it's a nice full circle story. But here we are talking about, and I've mentioned this plenty of times when it relates to Jim Harbaugh listening to his coaching staff, and same goes for Joe Hortiz at looking at opportunities to strengthen their team by any means necessary, even if it's for a one-year deal. And even if we're talking about Denzel Perryman as a 10-year veteran, the fact that you actually had a coach standing up to say, I want this guy as part of my unit, that's a testament to something. Navarro Bowman went on to say, he's been watching Perryman for a long time, says he plays the position really well. So that's a good testament, and as it relates to a lot of things, really. And I think that was a veteran presence that you need on this team, regardless of how the playing time is actually going to shake out. I think you could say that this linebacker group is better than what it looked like last year, with this maybe deeper than what it looked like last year. Still, obviously, question marks with your presumed starters in Henley and Colson as it stands right now, but it's definitely deeper than what it was last year.
I would agree. Gecko Cujo 76 says this is the best O-line I've ever seen on the Bolts. Jim Harbaugh and Joho, that's a fun one, meant it when they said they love tackles. So, OT observations. Before we get to ours, Jake, a couple that are here in the comments. We saw somebody was saying that their biggest one was there's a non-toxic work environment. Okay, I would agree with that. It's a non-toxic one. One thing that I have noticed, Jake, and you kind of alluded to it with Jim Harbaugh listening to his coaches, it appears very evident that Jim Harbaugh does not have any desire to either be or to make the appearance of him being the smartest in the room. That he takes advice and the sum is better than the individual parts. I think that's important for a team that's trying to build something new and build something fresh, because that takes some level of humility as a head coach to listen to others and not just speak to others and demand action, so to speak. And he will command respect and he will command a certain level of excellence and all of that. But you've heard him say multiple times back when he was talking about the draft and with Joe Hortiz and positional coaches, you listen to the experts. He heard that from his dad, learned that from his dad. Let the experts do what they do good. You can control what you control, that you do great. So I thought that was something that I have continuously picked up on, is him gaining insight and using the groupthink strategy versus him trickling down everything. Have you noticed that?
Yes. Yes, Dan. And again, I know we could keep going back to Navarro Bowman with this, but what you just said, there was if I didn't tell you who said this, I don't know where your mind would immediately go. But if I said to you that a coach said to players, we stress to the guys a lot, you're not going to make the team now being in shirts and shorts. Let's go out there and try to be the scout team or the practice team. And this goes into, again, the little details that Jim Harbaugh has talked about in terms of play the way you practice. Dan, I know you cut out there for a second. I'm not sure if you ended up
Don't know what happened.
Yeah. So I was basically saying, if you closed your eyes, and I didn't tell you who said this was the quote. We stress to the guys a lot. You're not going to make the team playing in shirts and shorts, which we know currently right now is what OTAs is all about. Let's go out there and try to be the scout team hero or the practice tempo violator.
Let's not do that. Yeah.
If I didn't tell you who that was, where would your mind go that said that?
Probably a player or a veteran, maybe.
Well, it's both. And in this case, it's your linebackers coach. That was Navarro Bowman who was saying that to the guys. Again, small details. Practice the way you play the way you practice. Whichever way you want to flip that with what Jim Harbaugh is installing right now.
Practice like a pro is what Navarro Bowman said. Yeah.
The little details. And these little details being installed in May are going to help tremendously by the time that we get to September.
Yes, I'm with you. Nick says Saley's practice is more like a party than an actual practice. So again, let's be real here. Like, while this is different, right? And there is no music, that doesn't mean that the previous one was a party. Like I had gone to several of those practices, and there was a lot of business happening then too. Yeah, they had music going on in the background, but a lot of the party stuff, I don't know, that's a little far. But it's different, right? Like most OTAs have music. I wouldn't say most OTAs are like parties. This is just I think this is a different ship that he's steering, and he's doing it buttoned up, and that's okay. Eddie asks, any news on linebacker Junior Colson, number 25?
So the report that we got was Junior Colson, about 40 minutes into practice, walked off the field with trainers. That was basically the last that we heard about it. In my opinion, the fact that we haven't gotten any update on that right now is probably good news. Truthfully, I know everybody was freaking out, and I understand it. It's, as a Chargers fan base, there is this feeling that there is that injury curse that is upon us, and somebody could be out there clipping his toenails, and the next thing you know, they're going to be out for the entire season. So I think that no update 2 days later is actually a good sign. I think we would have known by now if it was something more serious, because I've seen some reports in some other camps for serious injuries that had taken place, and they knew it the day of. I think if there was actually something serious going on with Junior Colson, we would have already known about it. We would have heard about it. So let's keep the optimism going. I know everybody's freaking out, but I think no news is good news in this circumstance.
Yep, it's early. And you heard Navarro Bowman, and I don't know if he was alluding to anything here, but you heard Navarro Bowman kind of talk about, getting prepared like a pro and being prepared for a 17-game season plus the playoffs. And one of the things that Junior Colson has to learn about is how to do that and set himself up to be able to withstand an NFL season, which is substantially longer than a college one. And so this could easily be a conditioning thing. This could be a nutrition thing. Like, it's to your point, I think you would probably hear something if it was bad, knock on wood here. But yeah, I mean, anytime your third round pick, who should probably been a second round pick, who's the leader of your defense, at least from a knowledge perspective right now, goes out and walks off the field, yeah, you're going to be a little worried. So I get it. Observation, the first round pick, Joe Alt, out there in pads and moving around quite a bit, doing different positions. Question here, then we'll get to the OTA observation. You had this one. In your opinion, this is from Eddie. Question, will this be the starting offensive line in week one? Left tackle, Rashawn Slater. left guard Zion Johnson, center Bradley Bozeman, right guard Trey Pipkins, right tackle Joe Alt. Anything there that you see not happening?
I think it all stems on the Trey Pipkins one, honestly, Dan. And who knows? Maybe if this ends up being to fruition, and this is something that was talked about even before the draft, for the potential for Trey Pipkins to be kicked into guard. We heard rumblings about this before, Joe Alt was ultimately ended up selected by the Chargers 5th overall. And for what we've heard over the last 2 days, there's been heavy rotation between Joe Alt with the second team and the starters, and rotation between Trey Pipkins at right tackle and right guard, and Jamari Sawyer moving back and forth between the line. If anything, this just breeds competition. This is exactly what you wanted, was to try to find the best 5 in order to protect Justin Herbert. That is your number one priority, obviously, heading into this season. So for me, I mean, who knows? Remember, Dan, when we were at training camp last year and we're out there on the field and we're looking at the right side of that line, because Trey Pipkins next to Jamari Sawyer, I even said it plenty of times, that was a lot of beef.
Where's the beef? He was right there.
Let's just say Jamari Sawyer ends up winning the right guard spot. Joe Alt is about as tall as Jamari Sawyer is wide.
Yeah, Jamari Sawyer and Zion Johnson both are like specimens.
Wide human beings. So I know I said, that's a lot of beef on the right side last year. I can't wait to see what that potentially looks like when we get into training camp. So if anything, it breeds competition. And ultimately, when you look at this, whoever ends up winning the starting job, you have a good backup. And so you have some depth on your offensive line. So yeah. I don't really see any situation that comes out of this, whoever it is that ends up taking that right guard spot, to be a bad situation.
Yeah, I agree. I'm fascinated to see how Trey Pipkins does at guard. And I know Jim Harbaugh talked about him being one of the 5 best players on the offensive line, or one of the 5 starters. I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically what he said. Jamari Sawyer, I think the right position for him would be kind of the swing tackle flex player. Because that's kind of what he was before Rashawn Slater went out. And then he was able to steady the ship when Rashawn Slater went out. And you're like, oh my goodness, this guy could be a starter. Do you want to rely on that for the entire season? I don't know about that. He's still young. I think, to answer the question, though, yes, I do think that that starting 5 will end up being it. Question here, Jake, about the defense. Any thoughts on the Chargers' defenses? This is from Gabriel Caldera at start of OTAs. Position battles, scheme, front 7 abilities, or secondary abilities or limitations?
Well, Asante Samuel Jr. is off to a good start, and he got off to a hot start last training camp. I remember when we first got in there, Dan. So it's good to see that, especially in a very big year for Asante Samuel Jr. And it's still crazy to think, with all of the secondary turnover that has taken place in the midst of the last 2 years, that all of a sudden Asante Samuel Jr. is the longest tenured guy in that secondary right now, and he's going into year 4. And this, of course, stems for a lot of different things. This is the Chargers not properly prioritizing the corner position over the last several years when they really should have. You can obviously see that from the standpoint that last year they drafted 2 defensive backs, albeit in the 6th and 7th round, but then you come back over the top in this year and you draft 2 of them back to back in the 5th. You go out and you acquire Kristian Fulton. I'm so excited to see how this secondary unit is going to end up panning out, and I still don't think that they are done adding to it. I think that you're going to see another body join this group between now and September, probably most likely around team cut time. And I know everybody talks about Simmons and adding that to the safety group. And look, financially, I just don't see that happening with Derwin James's contract. You just gave a contract extension to Alohi Gilman that was well deserved. The previous regime did this mistake a year ago. When you put a lot of money into one position offensively, you put a lot of money into another position defensively, and you got yourself into a little bit of a pickle. I don't think that you're going to end up paying 3 safeties big time contracts. I just don't see that happening. I am still a little bit interested as to why Simmons has not been signed as of yet, but
There's a lot in the secondary that has not.
There's a
been
lot in the
signed.
secondary. There may even be a situation after a post June 1st signing, depending on what that looks like. Maybe it is specifically just waiting until that date comes around. Not sure, but I feel like if that was the case, then he would have been picked up already because his skill set is obvious for what he's able to bring to a defense.
I think it's an age thing.
But secondary, I'm so excited to see this camp battle come about because you heard Steve Clinkscale talk about it 2 weeks ago in terms of what he wants from his defensive backs. He wants them all to know both positions, inside, outside, play in the slot. He wants them all to be familiar because that dreaded what always seems to come down every now and again. And when someone goes down, you're going to need someone that's going to be able to have to step up. And even if it's somebody that doesn't predominantly play that position, you need some healthy rotation. And that in turn, of course, is going to make your cornerback room even deeper when you have guys that could be versatile in that circumstance. So Asante Samuel Jr., he had a great start to OTAs. He had an interception, had a tip pass. Kristian Fulton also picked one off. AJ Finley had an interception as well. So secondary is going to be one to watch by the time that we get into training camp.
Yeah, shout out to Daniel Popper, the newlywed. Congratulations as well to Daniel Popper, recently married. Put out an article with some observations, and this one answers the question directly. First team defense, this is from Daniel Popper, had a pretty dominant showing against the Eastern Stick in the opening 11-on-11 period. Jake, 4 interceptions. Again, this is not Eastern Stick, not Justin Herbert, but Kristian Fulton, AJ Finley, Troy Dye, and Asante Samuel Jr. all had interceptions. And on the sidebar, looking at the offensive side, Justin Herbert, picking up right where we left off, apparently, this is according to Daniel Popper, completed his first 11 throws of practice. 11 for 11. The next one, the 12th one, almost was intercepted by Troy Dye. And then he completed another 6 straight. And then the next one, I believe, was intercepted by Asante Samuel Jr. So Asante has 2 picks, one against Stick, one against Justin Herbert. So I think the second one that the Asante Samuel Jr. won on Justin, I believe that one was tipped and was not directly intercepted. But anyways, any other defensive OTA takeaways?
Yeah, Dan, we can kind of go into this because Bud Dupree wasn't there the first day. I believe he was there the second day of OTAs. But one observation that actually came out, I believe it was from Eric Smith in his Chargers article that was up there, was the rotation with the edge rushers. And much like we got to see for a very short period of time last year, there is a situation where you could see Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Thule on the field at the same time. This was one, and this is what took place during OTAs this week because that's how they were lining up. And this was one of the selling points to Bud Dupree as well in terms of what they would want him to run. So if it means in situations like this where, yeah, on paper that Bud Dupree could be coming in here as edge 4, you could still have certain situations where you're having 3 of these guys coming after the quarterback in any type of rotation. I mean, we saw when Joey Bosa was healthy last year, we saw what he could do when he was actually kicked inside. And when he was put next to Khalil Mack, you remember what that looked like, or when he was paired right next to Thule?
Didn't hate it. That
wasn't fair. It almost seemed like every time that they ran that, it was either a sack, it was an incomplete pass, it was a quarterback hurry. There was always a result that came of a 3-rusher set that was like that. So if you can install that now with a healthy 4-man rotation, you're going to have something cooking.
Yeah, I'm with you. And speaking of starting defense, this is again according to Daniel Popper. Derwin James and Lohi Gilman at safety, Kristian Fulton, Asante Samuel Jr. were the 2 starting corners. Jazir Taylor in the slot, Perryman and Henley at inside, Bosa and Mack at edge, and a rotation on the interior, including Puna Ford, Morgan Fox, and Tito, among others. So Fulton and ASJ are your starters outside. Jazir Taylor starting inside. Derwin and Alohi, you know the rest. When do you think that secondary changes? I.e., the names you didn't hear. You didn't hear Cam Hart, who got snaps but not starting. Didn't hear Tribe Still. No AJ Finley. When do you think that those names could start creeping into those conversations?
Maybe when we get into mandatory minicamp, maybe there could be a little bit shift of the guard to say, okay, much like Clinkscale was talking about, we're stacking right now. We're stacking. Again, OTAs, no pads. You're not going at full speed. It's nice to see the 11 on 11 drills this early in camp, which is a nice change, I think. But maybe this is the adjustment period for Cam Hart and Terheeb Still right now.
As it should be, honestly.
Maybe they accelerate that just a little bit by the time that we hit mandatory minicamp, and then accelerate it again by the time that we hit training camp. And we'll see. Again, this secondary group, there's going to be so much competition. And for those same reasons that Steve Clinkscale was talking about, I want my guys to be versatile. He said he wants Asante Samuel Jr. to play outside, inside, and outside. Said the same thing for Kristian Fulton, that he sees him capable of playing both. And when you have that, you could either look at that as a great thing or something that's going to breed competition and possibly weed some things out by the time that training camp is over with. So not everybody can play both inside and outside as well as the next guy. So it's going to be fierce. And I love the mentality for that, because you're not just in your head assuming who you know outside of obviously Asante Samuel Jr., that you could slot them in somewhere. There's going to be a competition at a lot of different secondary spots.
Yeah, I agree. Nick says pretty good edge group with Mac, Bosa, Thule, Dupree, and Fox. And the thing I remember hearing early on when Jim Harbaugh and Jesse Minter were kind of talking about the players and stuff that they like, and versatility kept coming up over and over and over again. Mac, Bosa, Thule, and Fox, all four of those, incredibly versatile, run and pass. If those guys can stay healthy, I mean, that is lethal. Then you add in Dupree for safe measure. Like, that's a solid group. I don't know if there is a better group of 3, hell 4 in the NFL. I can argue maybe top 2. Like, that's really, really good. Caleb asked a question. Over under interceptions for Asante Samuel Jr. this season. He sets the line at 4.5. I go under. What say you? I'm not trying to poo-poo Asante Samuel Jr.
No, I get it. It's interesting because you have to take your brain out of the Brandon Staley defense, and you have to take your brain out of how torched they were over the last couple of years, and guys playing out of position and not knowing how to do their jobs. This is more.
He's had 2 interceptions each year he's played. I know we had the 3 in the playoffs, but
I'm still going to go under for it. And like Dan is saying, I'm not poo-pooing Asante Samuel Jr., but I would expect the secondary unit as a whole to improve because of what Jesse Minter and the rest of this coaching staff is going to install for this defense. I think their number one priority is getting after the quarterback, which everybody knows in turn helps the rest of your defense at every level. So I think the secondary unit as a whole will collectively be better. It's really hard to get any worse.
Yeah, I would agree. Nick says Fulton might just win the CB1 position. He's pretty talented. If they don't sign another one, I can almost guarantee you he's going to win the quarterback 1 position because they don't got any other ones, in my opinion. Anyways, I just don't think that they're not going to sign another one, because
you don't think that they're going to sign another one.
No. I don't think they won't.
You don't think they won't? Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
I'm sorry. Yes, Kristian Fulton is super talented, and there's a reason that he was drafted so high, and he was brought in here, stock low, buy high kind of thing. Like, I get all of that, but I am so tired of seeing teams rely on and gamble with hope as the thing that they bring out and trot out start the season. We have not seen CB1 Kristian Fulton. Why would you believe or trust that? I hope this coaching staff sees that and questions that. I just don't want to see that. I don't want to have to rely on it. And they could be right, and Kristian Fulton might ball out. But that is such an unnecessary risk for a team who has money to go out and solve it. So I just don't want to rely on hope and potential. Like I especially in the secondary, which is so important to Jesse Mitchell's defense. Like, give me something that I can trust going into the season other than Derwin and Alohi. Because right now, that's really the only two things I can trust in the secondary. Everything else is hope and potential. And that sounds harsh, I think, but it kind of is true. Am I wrong here?
It's only because you haven't seen it out on the field yet. Yes, we're talking football in May, and I don't care. But yeah, you still can't fully piece together what this secondary is going to look like. Obviously, like I just said, you hope that it's going to improve. I would expect it to improve. It's hard. I mean, it's not a high bar to get over after what they've done the last 2 years. But Kristian Fulton's an interesting situation because it's a 1-year deal. He took less money to come to the Chargers. I'm sure the coaching staff had something to do with that. When you heard him in his press conference, he had some things to air off of his chest about his previous position. I think he's self-aware of what the reputation is on him for the early part of his NFL career. He's still only 25 years old.
Oh, he's got a crazy chip on his shoulder. He's motivated. Make no mistake about it.
I've said if you could create a reclamation project out of Kristian Fulton and he could stay healthy, he has the talent to do it. He has the talent to do it. Health, and from what we heard of him, the locker room situation seemed to have hindered things for him. So I would hope, and it sounds like from what we've heard from him, that both of those situations are better, that he's 100% healthy as it currently stands right now, and that you have a great 2024 season. But to Dan's point, you just, as much as the Chargers don't like saying the term on paper, you don't like having to say that term hope anymore.
No, you don't. Question here, Jake, for someone that thinks he may have missed the chat. What do you think the chances are of us signing Simmons or Gilmore or both? Thanks, guys. It's a great show you guys have. Appreciate you, Alan. Thank you.
Okay, so I said my reasons on Simmons, just from price tag standpoint. We all know how talented he is. There's going to be a competition for his services whenever that ends up coming down. I'm still surprised that he has not been signed by another team as it currently stands right now. Now, here's my thought on Stephon Gilmore, and I have told Dan this, and we have talked about it in another podcast. Would Gilmore bring you depth?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where are you going with this?
But the Stephon Gilmore that was on the Dallas Cowboys, I don't think would be the Stephon Gilmore that you would get with the Los Angeles Chargers. And here's why. That defense is essentially what you would hope for the Chargers to be like.
Yeah.
That secondary unit was deep. Stephon Gilmore did not have to come in there and be the number one guy with the guys that they had in that secondary. There was less on his shoulders in that Dallas defense. Essentially, if you brought Stephon Gilmore in this defense right now, where would you slot him, Dan? As to say,
Stephon Gilmore?
Yes.
CB1. No question.
Okay, so that's why right there. This is nothing against Stephon Gilmore. He is one of the best corners in the league. But at 32 years old, he even said in an interview that he realizes that he's on the back end of his career. He even said that if people were looking to sign him, that he could come and contribute, he would have been signed already. So you bring in Stephon Gilmore. I love the fact of what Dallas did because they basically strengthened a strength by bringing him in last year. And when you have a cornerback unit like theirs, you can do that. As Dan and I just spent 5 minutes talking about, there's still so many question marks as it relates to this secondary with the Chargers. So that's why I posed that question to Dan. So, Dan, you're telling me that you would see Stephon Gilmore be a CB1. Now, is that strictly just out of reputation, which I understand?
No. Sorry, I thought you were going to ask a different question.
I was going to say that's strictly just based off of what he's done, and you can measure that with the rest of the room. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I
trust. I think
yeah.
to start. Okay. To answer the question with a question, who do you trust more as your CB1 going into the season? Stephon Gilmore or Kristian Fulton?
You would probably say Stephon Gilmore right now, but
End of story.
No, it's not the end of the story. Are you going to get the same results of Stephon Gilmore when he was in Dallas or when he was in New England for the Chargers if you're telling me at 32 years old that you're bringing him in as a CB1?
I don't know, honestly, but I trust that more than I trust Kristian Fulton. I'm not saying I'm getting
right
2 years ago Stephon Gilmore. And I'm also not just relying on just Stephon Gilmore. Like there's a few guys out there. Like you got a Dory Jackson still there, Xavier Howard still there, who I do like as well. I believe Cam Sutton is there as well. Steven Nelson, I'm down for. Like
just imagine what that list is going to look like by the end of August. By the time that we have training camp cuts, that's when I think that the next signing for a corner is going to take place. And again, nothing against Stephon Gilmore.
And again, I'm not saying just Stephon Gilmore, but what I am saying is I don't want to go into the season relying on Kristian Fulton being your CB1 based on his potential and hoping he can get back to his form when he was 3 years ago and hoping that he can get the coaching bump. Like, give me something. They have nothing proven, literally nothing proven in the quarterback room right now.
And that's a fair shake. And again, I'm not saying that signing Stephon Gilmore would be a bad move. If you're bringing him in to add depth to this locker room, which it definitely needs, then sure. But my perspective would be, what would be your expectations that you're getting out of Stephon Gilmore right now? And again, I get it from your perspective, Dan.
A safer Stevie
because there's so much. Yes, because there's so many question marks.
Yeah.
I get it. I just don't know if it would yield you the results that you're ultimately going to want.
And I don't necessarily know if they. And again, maybe we have different expectations of what we want the results to be. Like, I just want a Stephon Gilmore who can go in there and do his job. I don't need all Pro Bowl Stephon Gilmore. Like, give me an above average outside corner right now. Like, that's all I'm looking for. If we can get better from coaching, cool. A tier is here. Hello, my guys. I think he asked, can I send a question, please? Yes, of course. This is a Q&A episode, a tier. Come on. You know that. Elliot, Jake. Over under. Lad catches 55.
Is Lad McConkey not becoming everybody's favorite Charger within a span of a month? You heard from Daniel Popper in terms of OTA observations that the connection's already there with Justin Herbert, which we expected in a completely retooled wide receiver room. Dan, one of the things that I liked the most about it, very subtle, was that Daniel Popper said the phrase, Justin Herbert was spreading the ball around. Look, this wide receiver room is going to be extremely competitive, and if everything pans out the way that we expect from all these players, by the time cut day rolls around, it's going to be extremely tough. You went from 4 wide receivers on Thursday, April 25th, to all of a sudden the Chargers need to stop signing wide receivers because they have too many. I mean, this competition is going to be wild. But Dan, I loved the fact that he said that he was spreading the ball around. And what I mean by that is, you had old reliable number 13 for the better part of it, for virtually a decade. It was Justin Herbert's favorite receiver in Keenan Allen. When you needed a catch to move the chains on 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 21, whatever the hell it ended up being that the Chargers were in that circumstance, he was the one to give it to you. But I always thought in the back of my head, there's going to be a double team on Keenan Allen in this play, or a triple team on Keenan Allen this play, because everybody knows that Justin Herbert is going to rely on him the most because he was the most reliable wide receiver that the Chargers had. Having Justin Herbert spread this out more, and again, I take this as an indicator as far as how much the running game is going to help Justin Herbert in this circumstance, because the Chargers should not be playing many situations in 3rd and long, 3rd and 20, whatever the hell that is, because they can't run the ball. They will be able to run the ball. So if you're in a 3rd and 5 or less, you don't have to have that guy be your sole guy to move the chains. You could throw it to anybody. anybody, which I love that. So getting back to this original question, over under 55 catches. Look, I love to think about it, and you know that Ladd McConkey is probably going to be a heavy target for Justin Herbert for this season.
Barring health.
I'm going to say under, but you know what?
You want to go under?
Hang on.
Oh,
Didn't let me finish. I'm going to go under, but I hope to God that I'm wrong. Dan loves to talk to me about how my whole optimism has changed, and maybe, yeah, hey, I got a Jim Harbaugh injected into my veins. So
Look at Leo. Look at the comment. Wow, am I hearing Dan sound like Jake and Jake sounding like Dan?
You know, it is. Maybe it's opposite day. Who knows? Or maybe it's opposite months. Yes, who knows?
People are all over the Fulton over Gilmore thing. Nick says Fulton over Gilmore all day. Right now, in the chat. Again, we're not being homers here. Like, seriously. You're telling me that I'm not saying who has the highest potential, the highest ceiling, or any of that. I'm saying right now, who do you trust more to be your CB1 to start the season? What is going on here?
One man's opinion has apparently sparked off something in Dan. I don't know. But yes, I'll go under from the standpoint that I think the Chargers are going to run the ball more. But I also hope to God that I'm wrong, because having a rookie season like that would be awesome for this offense.
Totally. And talk about like a changing of the guard 1 year after the other, going from Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and then immediately kind of just right into, by the way, shout out to Keenan Allen. I don't know if folks have seen it. He put out like a tribute to Chargers fans and thanking them in the organization. High class. The guy's one of the greats, will be one of my favorites of all time as a Charger. And it was just really cool seeing it. Atir says, I'm sad and disappointed at the Chargers fans, saying 10-7. You take out AFC North and the Chiefs, I will go 2-4. Where do you see more losses? They're not making sense. You tell me, Jake and Dan. So, in short, he's asking what the prediction is for the season. I believe I had it at 11-6.
You ended up amending it. You actually went to 10-7.
I think I had 11-6 prior to the schedule release, and then seeing the games that I had them winning back, I had them winning and losing. The Browns game is the one that I think is the linchpin between 11-6 and 10-7.
Look, I ended up with 11-6. I originally had them losing that game in Cleveland. There's an interesting 3-game stretch there with Cleveland right in the mix of it. And honestly, look, I know we would love to see just scorched earth Jim Harbaugh winning wherever he goes, is going to have just a ridiculous record. But look, you can't account for some attrition that this team is still going to go through. Are they going to be much improved in the competition department? Yes. I expect this team to be 100% different from the last 3 coaching regimes in terms of how they compete on Sundays, how they adapt from a quarter to a quarter or a half to half basis on both offense and defense, which those of things have been plagued with this team over the last several years. I expect them to be better than that. The results that they put out to me in a game, even in a loss, to me will speak volumes more than what the previous regime would do on a losing streak. And when they would show week after week after week about having the same type of problems and not being able to improve it. I think that will 100% unequivocally change with Jim Harbaugh and this coaching staff and how it will resonate with the players.
Amen.
But again, there still will be some attrition that this team will have to go through, and there still will be some growing pains that they will have to go through. So, yes, I would love to stand up here and put on my homer cap for 2 minutes and say they're going to win every single game and go to the playoffs and win the Super Bowl. And for those that think that way, love you for that, because that's the type of energy that everybody needs, honestly. But 10-6 to me, 10-7, 11-6 seems realistic for me, given some of those games and some of those stretches, because watch this. Look at the schedule. Outside of just looking at the opponents, look at the schedule. I know the Chargers are 26th as it relates to overall strength of schedule, but they have to travel the most of any team in the entire league in terms of air miles. And I go back to it again. You're still going to have moments of attrition with this team. Much more competitive, but not flawless.
Brian Stowe says our fierce edge rushes are going to make our CBs much better this year. That I would agree with. It's a great point, Brian. In theory, when you give the quarterback less time, he tends to force some things. And that can make the cornerback room look great or better than maybe they are. Again, my feeling on this is I hope the Chargers bring in somebody that we know and have seen succeed in the NFL at the cornerback position. I'm not looking for an all-pro. I just want somebody that can be brought in as a veteran that I can trust. Is that too much to ask? Like, I don't think that's too much to ask.
No.
A couple things here, Jake. Saw a couple photos. These are all courtesy of the Chargers, by the way. Justin Herbert sporting, I think they call it like sunshine gold.
Don't
sunshine
you have
yellow?
this jersey? You have this jersey, yes?
I believe I have this jersey, but the blue is gray, if I remember right. So the blue numbers are gray. But looks pretty good. I like the blue. And then the guy he's throwing to, a little bit blurred here, but this is actually going to Quentin Johnston. We heard Chris Harry kind of talk about the rub that he got that last season, and some of it deservedly so, but he doesn't see this being the last of Quentin Johnston this year. I'm rooting for the kid, man. Like, I would love to see him shut a whole lot of people up. And while his last year was not what he wanted or anybody wanted, I think that there were a lot of factors in that. Some internally with him and some externally with the position that he was in and the scheme, the coaching staff, and just being a rookie wide receiver. It's not easy. Joe Hortiz talked about recently on the Kay Adams show. He's pretty bullish on him. Liked him when he was in Baltimore. It'd be awesome. Like, if Quentin Johnston can become the Quentin Johnston that they drafted him for, again, not they, but the Chargers, not Jim Harbaugh, and he could become like a bona fide wide receiver, you pair that skill set with a Ladd McConkey, a Brendan Rice, a Cornelius Johnson, you're cooking. You're hoping that he can turn into it because he brings athleticism that the team doesn't have. If you put it together, it's a pretty nasty group.
Look, with Quentin Johnston and all the criticisms, even some from Dan and myself that have come down, you understood why they come down. And you could say that even in a rookie season, that some of them may have been warranted for a variety of different reasons that were not just on Quentin Johnston's shoulders. For me, I look at this to say, look, Quentin Johnston had an unfortunate rookie season, one that the bar isn't really set that high for him to overcome in year two. This is not Brandon Staley coaching this team anymore. This is not Kellen Moore's offense that he is in anymore, which when Kellen Moore was hired, based off of what he did in Dallas, there were a lot of people that were excited about it, even Dan and I included, because we were obviously hoping that the run game at that point was going to improve. Never did. The overall passing concepts were going to improve. Never did. Kellen Moore, I don't believe, ever ended up having an identity of what he wanted to do with his offense.
Well, he may have had one that he wanted to do, but it never showed up on Sunday.
Never ended up panning out. When Mike Williams ended up going down, that was the moment where he said, okay, Quentin Johnston is now going to be elevated. He's going to have to step up. And in truth, it looks like he didn't even have the rapport with Justin Herbert because they didn't end up utilizing him that much immediately when Mike Williams was down, which is still strange to me why that did not end up taking place. And the overall development for his rookie season was up and down, at best, inconsistent. So there's a lot of factors that went into why Quentin Johnston did not have a good rookie season. Now you have a head coach and an offensive coordinator that know exactly what they want to do. And if we're going off of everything that we have been saying and seeing, and some even from Navarro Bowman and other times with Jesse Minter that we have heard from them, you're putting guys in the position that go to their strengths. And I think Jim Harbaugh remembers the last game that he played against Quentin Johnston before he ended up getting drafted to the Chargers. He had a pretty damn good game against the Wolverines in that one. So I think he knows exactly how he wants to deploy Quentin Johnston. And you got to believe that Quentin Johnston wants to quiet the voices and put that rookie season behind him.
You would think. You would think. Eddie says, why does he record Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey, DJ Chark, Brendan Rice, Darius Davis? That's 7? Palmer, Johnson, McConkey, Chark, Rice, Davis, Johnson. Will they all make the 53-man roster? That's 7. I don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think so. Even if you start thinking about what else you would pull away from the rest of the offense, I think the Chargers, you do it in your head. Chargers probably keep 9, maybe even 10 offensive linemen, depending on where they're at with depth. Ultimately, your running back group, what are you going to do? Keep 3 or 4? Everybody's kind of basically figuring that, as Isaiah Spiller could be the odd man out if you end up keeping 3. I still then think they end up keeping 4 because I think that Isaiah Spiller ends up fitting the mold of what Jim Harbaugh wants to do with this offense, especially with the other 3 running backs that would potentially be ahead of him. Tight ends, I think you end up keeping 3 between Disley, Hurst, and Parham. I don't think that you keep 4 ultimately, as the Chargers have done in the past. And so pair that with everything else you have to cut down with 53. I don't see them going any more than 6. I think it's necessary 100% that they have to keep 6 with all of the wide receiver turnover. There's no way
not 6. That is going to be.
It's wild to me. I think you have to keep 6.
If it's not 6, you're going to see someone that is going to be picked up in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
let go. Because think about that. If it's 5, right? The only ones who I think are locks to be on this team if it's 5, Ladd McConkey,
Palmer, Quentin Johnston, Darius Davis, and who's your 5th?
Hold on. Chark,
yes, that would be your 5th.
I'll say Chark. Okay, hold on. Let's do this. Chark, Ladd, probably Palmer because you could trust what he's doing. That's 3.
Quentin Johnston.
Hold on. Darius Davis.
Okay.
Because his special team, I think, is just you have to have it. You have 1 more. And then you're battling between Johnston, Rice, and Johnson. And 2 of those guys are not going to be on the team. If it was you, of those 3, who are you keeping? Like, who's more likely? Johnson, who they didn't draft, who was also a first-round pick, or one of the draft picks that they just drafted?
I mean, Johnson has the leg up as it currently stands right now because, yes, it's a different offense, but he's got more experience in it. And when you put it like that, I'm not saying that it's implausible.
It's not going to happen, but it's just.
But no, it's not going to happen. So this is specifically why the Chargers are going to keep 6 wide receivers. There's no way that they can keep less than 6 or more than 6. It has to be 6.
We got about maybe 5-10 minutes max here. So if you have any last minute questions or topics, feel free to shoot them in here. Guys, this is from Bolt to the Future. Guys, I'm so fired up for Rice's future. Do you think he's going to be a steal?
Man, he's got all the potential to do this. If you want someone to go into training camp and have eyes on, it's got to be Brendan Rice. Everything that he has said up until this point, much in the same type of circumstances as Kristian Fulton, Brendan Rice has a chip on his shoulder, and it's echoed even by his father, Jerry. We've heard how upset he was from the standpoint that his son was picked in the 7th round. He had 3rd and 4th round projections. We remember this through all of our, draft study. We remember where those projections were. Still couldn't even believe it when it ended up being day 3 that we found out that he was still there in the 7th round. And the Chargers ultimately ended up pulling the trigger. There is so much motivation and gratitude behind, I think, what Brendan Rice is coming into training camp this year for. So I'm really interested to see how the Chargers are going to end up deploying him, how he's ultimately going to shake out in training camp. I think he's got all the momentum on his side right now. What I liked the most, Dan, was his quote about accountability. Basically, if you see me out there in September, I did the work to make the roster. But if you don't, it means I didn't do what was needed of me. This
He's not
was
wrong.
before a single snap was taken. And you come in there with that mentality as a 7th round pick, he's ready to go. So I'm really excited to see what he's going to bring.
Yeah. Before we get to the rapid fire question and answer section, Jake, any other key takeaways from OTA so far from you? We talked about the receivers. We talked about Ladd, Justin, the corners getting some work in. Talked about the defensive line. Haven't talked running backs yet.
Yeah, not necessarily an OTA observation. I go back to what Chris Harry said when we had him on the show last week. We asked him a question, basically how we thought that this whole unit was going to shake out with Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, Kamani Vidal obviously being drafted. Where does Isaiah Spiller fit into all of this? And he said, if healthy, that J.K. Dobbins is going to be RB1 in this rotation. Still expected to be a running back by committee. But Chris Harry said if he's healthy, which all indications are, even from his own mouth, that he is, that JK is going to be running the rock. And let's not forget, yes, injuries aside, when he is healthy, we've seen what he can do. This is a former 2nd round pick. You got to be excited about this. And from the emphasis that's going to be on running the football and jamming it down people's throats on a down by down basis, there's going to be a heavy rotation of this. It's going to take a lot off Justin Herbert's shoulders. So are you buying this, Dan? JK being RB1, or does it still lean towards Gus Edwards?
I think it's Gus. And I honestly think I want it to be Gus Edwards because, I mean, while he could be electric, J.K. Dobbins, like, I don't know if I want him to have that many runs while he's kind of coming back, getting his legs out from under him again. Like, Gus Edwards is the bell cow for a reason. I think getting somebody like a J.K. Dobbins or a Kamani Vidal, like getting these guys so you could possibly break some off for 10, 20 plus, like those are good situationally. But as a bell cow, I think Gus Edwards is that guy. And we've seen that. We've seen him do that. And so there are some risks to this running back room. Yeah, it's a deep room now, but your top 2 are injury riddled. And your running back 3 is a rookie. And running back 4, you haven't seen anything. So it's, again, I like the room, but I'm just saying, I don't necessarily know if I want one guy just towing it, especially that guy who's coming off of some gnarly injuries. Okay, questions here. Let's go into this. Let's see. Zach says we went 3-8 in 1-score games last year. If we have 11 1-score games this year, what's your prediction for our record in those games? 3-8 last year. Jake, what say you?
Sean Merriman brought up this exact point when we had him on the show. Talking about the record that the Chargers were in 1-score games last year. How many do you believe that Jim Harbaugh would flip if he was coaching this team last year? I think he said, 5? Which I would agree with.
So then it'd be 8-3.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason for that is how to flip those. You need a run game, usually, to help close out games, to help churn chains, churn out clock. Chargers didn't have that ever. And so every team knew it was on the shoulders of Justin. You get Greg Roman, who's like the savant of running games. Like that matters. A running game matters. Coaching matters. Jim Harbaugh matters. Yeah, probably with you. I'd probably say it flips 3-8 to 8-3. I'd agree with you. Let's see. Question on from Daniel Brown. How are you feeling at interior defensive line? I don't know much about Ford. Fox is smaller. Does Justin start?
I don't think that Justin starts. I think you start with Puna, Ford. You have Tito, that you, as obviously now considered a veteran in this group of young defensive linemen that you have. Scott Matlock coming into his 2nd year. Still haven't really seen the full development of what he can be. This was a position that I still think is a sneaky one for by the time that we get to August, Dan, for one that the Chargers could use to strengthen again.
It could, yeah.
Because trust me, I love Puna Ford. Loved him when he came out of college. Loved what he was loved what he was doing when he was with Seattle. I know that he is not of the typical defensive lineman mold, but he's the type of guy that follows that motto, low guy always wins, which he does. He does. So I like the addition of Poona Ford to this defensive line, especially with the guys that end up being around him. And you look at just how vastly one position changes in the span of a season with Sebastian Joseph Day and Austin Johnson. Those days are gone. Those big contracts are no longer here. It's very different. I'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. I look at that though, Dan, and I still sense a little bit of a lack of depth in the middle. And so much like corner, that's why I think that that's a position that they may look to strengthen after August, just before week 1.
Okay, rapid fire here. Got 5 minutes. If you have not done so already, please do us a favor while we're chatting it up here, having a good time. Do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe. We're getting up to 7K plus now. I don't know what it is, but all a testament to Chargers fans. Question and answer section, Jake. Let's go fast here because I got a bunch of them. So if Herbert doesn't go to the playoffs this year, are people going to say this quarterback is never going to win in the big moments? Yes, people will say it.
People will say it. Doesn't mean it's true.
Yep. Next question. We have, let's see. Where'd it go? There we go. Man of the year. Who do you think is going to actually be our backup quarterback? I have a feeling that Easton isn't going to stick around. See what it did there. They signed him back.
I think he's the locked in QB2.
Yep, I agree. Jorge says JK ain't kidding. Let's see. There's some disrespectful things in comments that I will block if it continues. So just letting you guys know that. We need to show up week 1 in khakis and Harbaugh jerseys. That first part, 100%. Whatever you wear, and you guys do you. But week 1, SoFi, Raiders, home game,
Man,
Harbaugh era starts. Show up.
I would love to see a section of about 20 Chargers fans that just are in khakis and a bright blue polo with their caps on, and go out and get like a little headset like this just to give it like a full complete of the outfit. That would be awesome.
Yep. People are forgetting about Tito. No, we're not. The defensive line group, we've talked about this for weeks, Jake. I think you're more, I don't say concerned, but you see more of an opportunity to improve the interior defensive line, or more of a need to, than I do. I think I'm okay with the interior defensive line. Like, I think Scott Matlock I think he's solid. Tito was hurt, was rehabbing a bit. That guy is huge. Huge. Poona Ford, a Boygby, like that's already 5 guys. And that's not including Gerard Clark. That's not including, that plus Fox, plus the rest of that defensive line, plus Dupree. That's a dozen dudes before we even start. That's wild. Jorge, are you guys nervous about the corners? Hell yes, I am, Jorge. Good Lord, did you? Yeah. Yes, I am very. Atir asks, can DJ and Alohi finish top 4 safety duo? Top 4.
I'll say there's potential for this. And I'll say that again, based off of what Jesse Minter is going to do. And everything that we have heard is to take more off of Derwin's plate and allow him to play free. For Alohi being a free safety, he damn sure plays physical. There were so many times last year where he would hit somebody and that dude would have to walk off the field for a play. So Alohi, to me, just he plays more physical than a traditional free safety. So I like the idea of it. I think there's potential to do it. It's a cool thing to think about, but let's pump the brakes.
Paradise Hills, Jake. How do you have more Raiders fans in LA and San Diego and rent from the Rams and think you could win? I don't think Paradise Hills understands how.
So we're just basing everything off of fan bases now. Okay,
but also, I don't know how he's asking how there have been more Raiders fans in LA and San Diego. Does he not understand the history of the Rams or the Raiders?
I think he's translating it to now.
No,
he's translating it to now.
But it's a stupid question. Sorry. It's a stupid question. Plus Thule playing inside on third downs like last season. Yes, I agree. If that edge group can stay healthy, man, that that makes up for so many possible holes on the interior. That's, I think, where the success or failure, or one of the biggest factors in this team being a success or failure on defense, is if that edge group can stay healthy. If they can stay healthy or ride the ship while one is being nursed back from injury, look out, man, because that group with this Minter defense is going to be sick. And I'm telling you, probably the thing I'm most excited about, and I know I shouldn't, I have to temper my expectations. Daniel, temper your expectations. But the linebacking possibilities, I know they're young. And I know I just got done saying this an hour ago. Like, we got to temper our expectations because they're young and they haven't played. But the possibilities, if those guys can hit their potential, those guys being Henley and Colson and Perryman, like that trio, that's what I'm excited for, because that athleticism is wild. We have not seen that here in years. Jake, anything else want to talk about with the great friends before we head on out of here? I'm blocking Paradise Hills because disrespect doesn't work here. Anything else, Jake?
No, man. This is what football in May is all about. It's, again, not trying to overshoot our shot. We understand that these guys are not in pads right now, so it's early expectations, but it's still something to talk about. It's still something to be excited about as we get closer to June, which once we get past mandatory minicamp, that droll is really going to take effect until the time we end up hitting training camp in late July.
Okay. Well, it is May 22nd, so let's give a villain opportunity in May. Jorge asked, Jake, what's the floor for wins this season? I'm asking you because I know you tend to be the pessimist of the show.
No argument.
Which is a bad thing, by the way. Every show needs a villain. What's the floor for wins?
Floor for wins, I would say, has to be 10. I think that has to be 10, honestly.
No, the floor, not what you think it needs to be, but what do you think the floor is? Like, at worst, how many wins do you think this team will get?
Well, here's my point at that, Dan. I say it needs to be because I think that's what you're going to need to get to the playoffs.
No. I think the question is worst case scenario.
Well, worst case scenario.
Yeah, like what? That's
okay. What's so, like, floor? Literally put my old school pessimistic hat on.
Yeah, read the question. You tend to be the pessimist.
I've spent an hour and 20 minutes just what's feeling really energetic. I just can't flip it on a script like that. Maybe go 7-10. Maybe go 7-10. That would be catastrophe. That would be the Chargers really maybe are cursed. Maybe that would be the Chargers just have a lot to work on. Even with Jim Harbaugh, you could say that, okay, that would be the growing pain type of situation.
Yep.
But if that ended up playing out, I would expect them to be a lot better by the time that 2025 rolls around.
Yeah, I think, 7 would be if this team gets crazy injuries, like crazy again. And then we're all talking about the jinx is real and all that jazz. I think it's probably 8 or 9. I think 9 is probably like, if they go, because remember, the schedule is relatively easy. And I think 9 would probably be my answer. Last question here, Jake. Do you guys think, this is from Zach, do you think Herbert plays the first preseason game this year?
Yes. And why do I say that? Because of everything that you're seeing so far in just a few practices, the little details. If we're already putting them in game attire and having them tuck in their jerseys to their pants, and now seeing no music being playing and this conditioning that you're doing, practice the way you play or play the way you practice, whichever way you want to say that phrase.
Practice like a pro.
Thank you. Then yes, I think that you could see Justin Herbert getting a few series in the first preseason game.
Yeah, I think we do too. Jake, this has been fun. Love these live shows. Bunch of people in here. Thank you guys and gals for all the comments and banter back and forth. This has been great. There's a signing event happening. We'll talk more about it on the next show, but tons of folks. I think Josh Palmer will be there. Asante Samuel Jr. is there. Dan Fouts is there. A bunch of guys will be there. So we'll give you guys more information as we get closer and closer, but highly recommend staying tuned for that. Jake, it's been fun. We're already at Wednesday. This is wild. Hump Day is almost behind us. Thanks for doing this. This is great. Anything else? We're out of here?
That's it.
Cool. For Jake, myself, LAFB, and Chargers Unleashed, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you guys soon. See you later.